The polarizing Brazilian presidential battle between outgoing President Bolsonaro and former President Lula da Silva will head to a second round at the end of the month. This after the former president, who many pollsters predicted to garner 50% of the votes, fell short of expectations. And though he did emerge at the top of the table with 48.4% of the votes compared to Bolsonaro's 43.2%, the leftist veteran fell short of the 50% mark that is required to avoid the runoff. There were a total of 11 candidates, including Lula and Bolsonaro, in the presidential race. The result would come as relief of sorts for Bolsonaro, who led a highly polarizing and divisive campaign against Lula. That's not all. As if taking a cue from the former American President Donald Trump, Bolsonaro said that he will not demit office if the results were unfavorable to him. Bolsonaro, who's been criticized for his handling of the COVID pandemic, his support for gun culture, and his attempts to subvert democratic institutions, enjoys considerable support among the conservatives, the evangelical Christians, and the armed forces, big business and rural landholders. Joining us now is political science professor at the Getulio Vargas University in Sao Paulo, Professor Casaros. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. It is not an outcome that the former president will like. It has fallen short of the expectations and certainly comes as relief for Bolsonaro.
Jermaine, thanks for having me. Yeah, it was a very mixed result yesterday. I mean, Lula was expecting, and most of his supporters, of course, were expecting to win the elections in the first round, and of course the results were disappointing. I'd say that Bolsonaro was the main winner of the first round of elections, even though he fell 6 million votes behind Lula in the first round. If you look at the results of state assemblies, of Congress, and state governors, Bolsonaro's movement that we call Bolsonarismo in Brazil came out very strong and very energized. So that might be an important asset for Bolsonaro in this month-long period between the two rounds of elections. So Bolsonaro gets to the second round runoff with a little bit more leverage than Lula, I'd say, despite the votes that he's missing. I'd say that Bolsonaro is he has been able to turn the elections to his favor, at least for now.
Yes, it certainly seems to be that way if one goes by what the tally tells us at the end of the first round. But, you know, I've been reading reports capturing the mood across the Lula camp, and many, while disappointed, do believe that, look, we're just going to have to fight harder. We're going to have to put up an even more aggressive campaign to try and swing things around in round two. What do you make of that? And do you believe that, given the leverage, as you point out, the advantage that Bolsonaro now enjoys, it's going to be an even harder fight for Lula?
It most definitely will. Lula will have to be very assertive and very aggressive in his campaign. I think it's important for Lula to clearly show voters what kind of government he's willing to run. Lula relied most of his first round campaign on his strong popularity. So he didn't do much to tell people about what his plans are, what his policies will be, and what his government will look like. So I think it's important now that Lula will signal voters that he's really willing to build a national unity government against Bolsonaro and, of course, in favor of Brazil. At the same time, I think that Bolsonaro will have, he comes out on a very strong momentum, mostly because Congress and state assemblies have been massively pro-Bolsonaro at this point. So his caucus, his party caucus on Congress came out stronger than expected. So I think that even if Lula wins the elections, and that's something that we have to look into, even if he wins the elections, it will be very hard for Lula to govern under such circumstances. He's going to face hostile governors and hostile Congress people, and that's probably going to make Lula weaker as a president, especially in this initial period after taking office.
Well, speaking of hostility, what do you make of Bolsonaro's threat, you know, trying to pull Donald Trump, saying that even if the votes don't go in my favor, he's unlikely to demit office?
Well, that's by far the most complicated aspect of the 2022 elections. We've never seen anything like this in recent Brazilian history. And Bolsonaro has persistently reaffirmed that he's not going to accept the election's results if he loses the election. And yesterday's results sort of served Bolsonaro well because he's able to strengthen his narrative of electoral fraud in the fraudulent polls as well. I'd say that polling institutes were also defeated in yesterday's results because most of them were very inconsistent with what we saw from yesterday's election. So I think that Bolsonaro strengthens his voters' sentiment that we are facing a massive and a generalized electoral fraud. I'm pretty much convinced that this is not the case. Things are as expected in many different ways, and I don't think elections in Brazil are fraudulent whatsoever. There have been many international observers looking into the security and the validity of the results. So I think that Bolsonaro will probably stir his supporters to take on the streets in case he loses, and that's where violence comes in. We might see in Brazil a scenario that really resembles what we saw in the United States on January 6th, and with two main differences. The first one is Bolsonaro enjoys considerable support among the armed forces and security forces. And also, I'd say that Brazil's institutions are unfortunately not as strong as the American institutions to withstand such an attack on democracy as we are about to see in Brazil.
Well, we will have to wait to see what the results are of round two. And then, of course, that eventuality, if Bolsonaro does, in fact, decide to take his threat forward of not demitting office if the electoral result doesn't go in his favor. Professor Casaros, thanks very much for joining us here on The Global. I appreciate your time and your opinion. Well, we will turn the spotlight now